Hey, welcome to episode 2 of Cooperant Learning's podcast. This is a series with subject matter experts that we invite in to talk about all things behavior analysis and working with adult populations. The purpose of this podcast really is to shed some light on some of the different considerations and situations that a behavior analyst working with adult populations might get into. One of those situations is the topic of today's podcast, sexual autonomy. And who better to talk to us about sexual autonomy and behavior analysis than our guest today? During this episode, Nicholas guides us on everything from the background on ABA and sexuality, sexual education and teaching consent, to advocacy, rights, and helping clients live a more autonomous and less restrictive life. We're going to get to the episode, but first I want to tell you about Sparks Behavioral Services. Cooperant Learning is a project of Sparks. Sparks Behavioral Services uses behavioral science to help improve the lives of the people we work with, regardless of the nature or severity of their needs. Sparks BCBAs and behavior techs enjoy the opportunity to work in group homes, adult foster care homes, and with families, with a goal to help individuals lead more independent and less restrictive lives. We're always interested in meeting like-minded folks. If you're a BCBA living in the Midwest and you're interested in learning more, please check us out at sparksbehavioralservices.com. And with that, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Nicholas, thanks so much for being here. And do you mind introducing yourself to everybody?
Thank you for having me. Nicholas Maio-Aether. I'm a behavior analyst and certified sexuality counselor, owner at Empowered, a Center for Sexuality, LLC, since 2015, where we've been providing sexual and sociosexual behavior analysis or focused behavior analysis pretty exclusively. And we've been doing that across populations, disability and neurotypical population as well.
That's very cool. What would you say sexual behavior analysis is? And I'll ask the question that maybe you get asked a lot. How is that ABA?
Yeah, no, I do get asked that. So a lot of people come at me and they tell me that, if you're not working with autistic children, it's not ABA. And I'm like, have you read Java before 1990? So we have to consider the history of the field. Even while autism treatment was being built up, there was other stuff happening on the side, and autism treatment was not at the forefront of the original disseminations of ABA. If we look, early ABA was often focused on interpersonal relationships. It was often focused on sexuality from a very oppressive stance. But we can say that there is a history of ABA regarding sexuality and regarding relationships that actually predates ABA regarding autism and disability. So there's that. It's not a beautiful history, I'm going to be honest, but it is there. To me, at the end of the day, it's ABA if it meets two criteria. One is going to be the 7 dimensions, right? Get a cab. The other is going to be the assumptions of science. As long as you're meeting the assumptions of science and get a cab, it's ABA. And so that's something that I like to really point out is like a lot of other provider types have like little moments of ABA and what they're doing. And we're just very, very conceptually systematic in making sure that we're maintaining all of those parts.
Even in working in adult services, we get asked that a lot too, like sitting at the booths and like, oh, you don't have a clinic, or, oh, ABA is supposed to look a certain way, and we're out there saying, no, it doesn't necessarily look topographically the same across all these different providers and things like that. So it's a really, really cool thing that you're doing. Do you ever get backlash, or somebody who's familiar with some of those maybe more controversial historical markers of ABA? Do you ever get, I've heard you talk about, the words we use like environmental manipulation and things like that. Do you ever get some backlash or questions about those terms or the history of ABA?
I would say initially I was getting backlash about it. And part of it was that I didn't know enough of my own history. Going in and learning more, reading all of the articles, the early articles about ABA and gender conforming, and ABA to shape away homosexuality, and ABA to try and make little boys more masculine and stuff like that. So looking through all of that, it became a lot easier to navigate the conversation, because if someone says ABA is conversion therapy or ABA is abuse, and you say, well, no, it's not. It's just a a hard line meeting a hard line, right? So we have to be able to navigate that conversation. And so saying, I can understand why you would think that, because it has been used abusively in the past. And let's talk about that. And then let's talk about what we're doing now and how starkly and dramatically different those are. Let's also acknowledge that while it's not an excuse for ABA, every other field of mental health and even medical health has a very dark history of when they initially started. It's always trying to figure stuff out at the expense of the clients. That is every history of every field. Is that an excuse for us? No, it's not. But at the same time, if you want to take that and say that makes us worse than everybody, that's an inaccurate argument there. It's kind of almost invalid. But the other piece that I think is really important is to acknowledge that, we have boards now. There are 3 boards in the US alone. And these boards have ethics codes. When we look at a lot of the stuff that was being done in earlier ABA and even like the Lavos mass trials and things of that nature, these were before the ethics codes and before a board, and anybody was allowed to call themselves a behavior analyst. So if we really look back into things, Lavos was licensed as a clinical psychologist. He called himself a behavior analyst, and he did have a behavior analytic frame. But it is interesting to me that Lavos's studies are never categorized as like clinical psychology.
Right. Steve, go ahead. You have a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to see, because you've gone down this line a little bit, do you think it's as much, we were doing things that we maybe should not have been doing as a field, or the context of society and what is appropriate has changed too? Because I think back, if you look at any of your historical heroes, you're probably going to find something that you're really not comfortable or really against at some point in their history.
We learn, we grow, we change, right? So I will say, even in like one of my most recent LinkedIn posts that's about this topic, one of the things that I mentioned in there is that, we basically, we have this shift, we have this growth, and that ABA doesn't, like you were saying, it doesn't have to look like any particular thing, right? I'm sorry, the very fine-tuned part of your message somehow is escaping my head. Steve,
Sure.
could you repeat your tightest?
Yeah, basically what I was thinking is it's our social validity. Is it that we weren't collecting that social validity previously, or is it that what is socially valid has changed?
So yes, thank you. So what I did talk about in that post was that until 1978, the APA said that homosexuality was a deviance to be gotten rid of, right? So even then, those studies that were being done under a clinical psychology license were being done because that was the norm. That was the standard back then. And I will say again, it doesn't give those people excuse. Like, you can still look and say, hey, what I'm doing is hurting this person. Like, maybe I'm not okay with that. But at the same time, he was in good company. A lot of people were trying to shape away homosexuality. A lot of people still to this day try to kind of shape in and force conformity. And a lot of people who cannot do that under licensure move into things like pastoral counseling and stuff, so that they're able to still use highly aversive methods that are not allowed in under ethics codes.
Yeah, it almost seems to me like there's just such a wide breadth of what one group versus another group, or one person versus another, will consider socially acceptable, that we as behavior analysts need to make sure we're on the safe end, because our science allows us to do so much, but we need to keep checking back in with society to say, okay, no, what do you think we should be doing, and what's not appropriate?
Absolutely. And I do think that this is an area where we really need to be at the forefront of what's going on with adults who have received services. And if we look at like particularly autistic adults, some of these studies also have overlaps with adults with ID, but we notice incredibly high rates of gender nonconforming and quote unquote queer behavior, higher levels of identifying as a member of the LGBTQIA plus community. So like a conservative estimate for autistic adults is 55%, which means that technically it's a small, but it's a majority are going to identify as LGBTQIA plus. And so when we look at that, and again, social validity, right? What is socially valid and what are we teaching? Are we setting them up for success in the queer community? Because I don't see a lot of that kind of programming.
Changing topics, not changing topics, but along those lines, I should say, the CBS certification, do you mind telling us about that? This is a certification that you developed, right?
Yes. So the certified behavioral sexologist, and we also have the CBSC, which is a certified behavioral sexologist for common concerns in couples. So we call that level 1, level 2. The program in essence is going to be 60 CEUs for level 1, and they're all focused on sexual behavior analysis. And they're not focused on a lot of hypotheticals, a lot of like, this is what we think might be. It's actual practice. It's talking about the how-tos, real lived experience of the clinicians who are presenting. And so it's a very unique training program in that regard. We also do a 10-hour in-person additional CEU evaluation. We host those 3 times a year. And then we do a comprehensive exam, but we're nice. So we break that up into each CEU. So every CEU, you just take a portion of that instead of having to do it all at once. We've already all dealt with one big test. Let's not deal with that again. But basically throughout that process, they also do a supervised practicum. The supervised practicum, they do have to bring in video, so we actually see them doing the work with their clients. We give feedback on that. There's both group and individual supervision within the practicum. So it's a rather robust program. In the CBSC level 2, we have 30 additional continuing education hours and an entire additional supervised practicum. And that one is really looking at how do you address quote unquote sexual dysfunction or relationship issues without moving into a psychotherapeutic scope. How do you remain a behavior analyst and still assist in those things?
So keeping things scientific while still addressing these issues. What other skills would you say are in certified behavioral sexologist wheelhouse? Like what are they equipped to deal with when they come out of your program?
Oh, I have a task list. Give me a second. don't ask me a question you don't want a really good answer. So at level 1, they should be coming out. Now, we have acknowledged that not everybody will have the exact same competencies. Just like when you pass a BACB exam, you're not all going to have the exact same competencies. So we actually have it broken down on their tracker so that they can tell it, not only if they've had client hours, but if they've had supervision for any of those topics. And we tell our students they need to have both supervision and client hours in something before they can say, hey, I'm good, I can do it on my own. So our tracker is broken down to make sure that they have both of those before they start doing work on their own. So we have behavioral assessment, skills assessment, treatment planning, right? Parent training, staff training. But all of those are going to be focused in sexuality. So those are sexual behavior assessments and sexual skills assessments, treatment planning, building up sexual behavior plan, parent training focused on sexual and sociosexual behavior, puberty, what to expect, why you should not be forcing your kid to allow tickles or to kiss grandma. So we get into all of that stuff. But then we also have assessing for abuse and trauma, abuse prevention methods, public versus private instruction, consent instruction, genital hygiene, puberty instruction, anatomy instruction, the shaping of safe solo sex behaviors. We say solo sex instead of masturbation because masturbation is Latin for polluting with your hands, which is like really dirty sounding. And it's really not what we want to be implying when we're talking about this stuff. So we call it solo sex because that's what it is. We then have partnered sex instruction, STI and safety instruction, pregnancy and child instruction, addressing sexual impulsivity or compulsions that would appear like addiction, counterfeit deviance, offending behaviors, gender navigation, LGBTQIA plus direct instruction, LGBTQIA plus affirming system care, so teaching the systems to be affirming, dating and relationships, pornography literacy, and adult novelty access and use. That is all level 1.
That's all level 1.
That's level 1.
That's such a well-rounded, encompassing, I don't know if I could think of another topic to include.
I appreciate that. I came up with all of this on my own, so I appreciate
that's great. Not that I'm the expert, but yeah, that's amazing. Somebody has their hand up. I can't see. Steve, go ahead.
It's me again, as always. I was just going to say little pieces of that here and there I've developed a lot over the years just because of consumers that we have encountered more so than trying to develop an all-encompassing program. And so it is very impressive to think of all those things that I hadn't even thought of yet that do need to be addressed with the consumers we may have. I mean, we've encountered probably close to 1,000 people over the last 8 years that we've developed behavior plans for and only hit small pieces of that.
Yeah, I appreciate
my question really is, did you develop this more because you saw people working outside their scope of competency, or because there wasn't an opportunity for very many behavior analysts to learn this sort of thing?
Yes and yes.
Okay. Because I know I had it at Western Michigan University, the professors I was working with, while treating severe aberrant behavior, basically were the ones who helped shape my repertoire in this area. But I can see that there's not much out there except for what you're doing.
I really appreciate that. So as a certified sexuality counselor, I wanted letters behind my name that demonstrated that I had competency in sexuality. And certified sexuality counselor does not do psychotherapy counseling. It's more like a king's assistant counseling, like you're that person who's kind of a pushy prompter and guiding people. So there is a bit of a difference in the word counselor for sexuality versus other fields of mental health. But going that route, it was an appropriate route for a behavior analyst at ASECT, which is the board that I got that through. They do categorize behavior analysts under the counseling umbrella. But I still had to take a bunch of coursework on stuff that was out of our scope, even though I was going to be doing counseling in the terms of pushy prompting. In order to, get all of the ASECT credits and move through towards the certification, I was taking what's being offered, right? Well, what is being offered? And a lot of it was stuff like in-depth attachment theory assessments. I'm not going to do any of that in this work. At the same time, I needed that 3 hours to move forward at ASECT. So I had to pay $90 to learn about attachment theory assessments and spend 3 hours basically just doodling because I knew I wasn't going to use any of the material. So it's one of those things where I wanted to create a program where every bit of information was going to be relevant to behavior analytic practice. And then the other piece was we kept seeing people. The whole idea was kicked off in 2018 when we kept seeing people posting in Facebook, and it was mainly Facebook, that I just have a client who's engaging in all of these maladaptive sexual behaviors. So what do I do? And people are like, just throwing out random advice on things to do. And it was like, whoa. And then we'd have people who are like, hey, I just board certified last week, and I'm taking on this client who's been attempting to rape his roommate. And it's okay because, I'm a scientist of all human behavior. And I'm just like, you're probably not ready for that. I wouldn't throw even my own staff at that unless they were kind of senior staff, right? It's just like, what? So when I saw that people were just willy-nillying the sexuality component of behavior analysis, I was like, that's not behavior analytic. There's a huge problem to guesswork. and calling that ABA. And it's dangerous. We have people who literally kill themselves over their gender identity or sexual orientation. We have people who harm themselves or others trying to get access to sexual gratification. Like, this is not an area to be willy-nillying. It boggles my mind. And so, yes, had to create this program. It was just necessary.
Yeah, I think we see a lot of that in the severe aberrant behavior realm in general, where you've come through a program where it taught you in an autism center type setting, and now we have someone who's homicidal, suicidal, sexual deviant, and we're like, please at least give us a call for some pointers, the things that are being said out there. Even then I wouldn't feel comfortable signing off on it, but at least you have something else to rely on other than the little bit of training you may have gotten in that.
Absolutely. Yep.
And even along those lines, not even severe aberrant behavior, but things come up like, I want to date and I don't know how. I've never been on a date before. I don't even know what my type is. Can you help me in this? From that all the way to a home calls me because somebody's soliciting hookups via an app, and there's strangers showing up at the door, and they don't know what to do. They just, take this person's phone away. People being catfished or scammed and things like that. And along the way, more often than not, there's usually somebody, usually in a guardian role or somebody looking out for this person who's very, very against, exploring teaching or exploring any sort of proactive strategy and supporting somebody in this role and like what they want to do with their lives and what they want their lives to look like. And that's where it comes to what I talked about before, restricting. Do you navigate situations like that? And I guess what tips or how do you navigate those scenarios where there's differing opinions coming to the table?
I mean, like a behavior analyst, I come to it and I pay attention to the context, right? We're functional contextualists. So if it's parents and they're like not giving me buy-in because I can tell that their kid is queer. Like, I'm trying to help them navigate this system, but they're like, no, there's no way. He's just autistic. That's all. He's just confused. Social contagion. I've heard all of these things, right? And so it's like, in those moments, if it's a parent or somebody very invested from a care standpoint, I've been disseminating this. I came up with this one day, and it's been working. It didn't work one time. One time it fell flat on its face, but it's been working across the board aside from that. I tell them that, if they've ever worked with behavior analysts, the likelihood is that they've heard that there's 4 functions of behavior. Any assessments that we're doing are going to be looking at 4 functions of behavior. But in my lived experience, my practice as a clinician, I've come to find a 5th. And that 5th is love. And love makes people do crazy things. Love can make a mom lift a car. She could not do that for attention. She could not typically do that for access or escape, right? So love can it's this crazy extra thing. And sometimes the topography of our love behaviors might be received by somebody else as hate. And if what you're doing is you're trying, your function, your underlying is to love, to protect, to give this person their best life, I find that admirable. And I actually appreciate that you're fighting with me on this. So the fact that you're willing to stand up for your little human this much means we're going to be a great team, because I also want your kid to be successful and to have a great life. And I want your kid to be able to receive your love and recognize it as love. I want your kid to feel loved. So let's work together on this. And so that has been awesome. The buy-in that I have gotten when I acknowledge that I'm not just coming in being like, you're a bad parent. I'm like, oh, this is love. They're like, yes, it is. My kid doesn't tell me that, right? And so then there's you're catering to the parental MO. But at the same time, you're using it to cater to your own MO as a clinician and get things where you need it to be. So I've done that significantly multiple times. When it is more of a system, guardians that are court appointed or it's the head of an agency or other people that are giving me a bunch of pushback. Then we start looking at statistics and we start looking at articles. Like very recently, I was consulting for a company that was consulting for a hospital system in Canada. And they had a man who'd been in residential, or not residential, in inpatient. He was in inpatient psych setting. It was meant to be, what, a 3-day hold max? He had been in there for 20 plus years. And they were never planning to let him out. The reason that they brought in the other behavior analyst was so that they could try to reduce the number of holds that this guy was having a day, which were upwards of 10 to 20 holds per day, easily 100 to 300 holds in a month. They called them code whites, and it would be everybody would come down and like jump on this guy. So I came in, and one of the first things that the other BCBA told me during my consultancy was that this guy, he's been diagnosed pedophilic, all these other things. The behaviors he's engaging in, he's requesting diapers, he's requesting pacifiers, he wants to watch children's shows that don't necessarily feature children. Like he wants to watch shows that kids would want to watch themselves. And I'm looking at all of this and I'm like, this is the profile of an adult baby and diaper lover, which is a population that I work with. And they are not necessarily going to be minor attracted. There can be overlap from any population with minor attraction, but it is not by any means seen as a correlate. And so I brought forth, what I thought, and that BCBA took it to the hospital, and they were like, "Oh no, absolutely not, awful, no way." I was like, "Can I get a meeting direct? Let's have a 3-way meeting." So we had a 3-way meeting, me, the other behavior analyst, and the hospital director. And we talked about my own clinical practice and then also research articles that were written by some of my friends where they had also done this work. And I was able to convince this director to give us a shot, because in the case of an adult baby, oftentimes this type of behavior towards staff that is vulgar and going against all of the boundaries and the rules is because they want staff to punish them. They want staff to take on a mommy daddy role and control them. And these holds were highly sexually gratifying for this individual. So of course he wants them multiple times a day. I was like, you guys realize every time you argue with him, that's foreplay, and every time that you do a hold, that's sex? And they really changed their approach. I'll throw out there that behavior analyst is in my program and has continued to focus on him for her supervision. So I've gotten to see his journey. And that individual is actually now slated for a release, which is never on the table for him.
And so that had gone on for years before you came in, just with that extra background knowledge of saying, hey, this is the function here that you guys might not have been aware of. And now
he has no access to, because they're like, he wants diapers and stuff, and he wants to watch children's shows, and he wants to have a pacifier so he can groom children. And I'm like, when was the last time he had access to children? 21 years ago. When's the next time he's going to have access to children? He never will. Does he know that? Yes. Then he's not trying to groom children. This is not about trying to groom anybody. He wants these things. Give them to him. So we set up a behavioral contract. As long as he does not engage in bratty behavior with staff or try to get put into a hold, he can access a diaper every day. Like he gets a diaper budget and he can figure that out for himself. And he has access to pacifier and sippy cups and things like that now. We also gave him sanctioned naughtiness. So he does want a little bit of a back and forth, like he needs it a little bit. And so we went ahead and we gave him adult jokes that he could tell to the other consumers or to staff. We picked out some staff that felt comfortable hearing adult jokes. And if he wants to tell an adult joke, they'll be like, oh, you're naughty, you're bad. Oh man, but that's about as far as they'll go with it. And he's cool with that. And that has been enough for him so far.
And in the meantime, he's in a less restrictive environment and safer because he's not in as many holds, right?
Absolutely. And we're looking at, eventually a group home instead of a psychiatric hospital, which would be amazing.
Yeah.
So
ahead, Steve.
With that, then just trying to conceptualize it behavior analytically, and we usually think of sexual behavior being automatically reinforced, is there an ongoing pairing between actual sexual gratification and those behaviors, or is it just they've been paired so strongly historically that you get some level of sexual gratification kind of without that ongoing pairing?
So to be really simple, and even in like just base language, there's going to be like multiple reasons that people engage in sexual behavior, and it almost always is going to involve, if it's just you, yeah, that's purely automatic. But if it involves another person, it's going to be a blended function of automatic and attention. And so we have to consider that a lot of my QABFs and fasts look really muddled. And so for instance, foot fetish, right? A foot fetish. He's into feet. Okay, cool. So I get him a model foot, and that's not enough for him. What's going on? So we go into the history. Well, he's been tackling women and sniffing their feet. There's no one to tackle. There's no one freaking out right now. There's no excitement. It's just the foot. So then we have to get in there and we have to figure out, was the excitement more important? Was the foot more important? Are they both equally important? What can we do? How can we get really big, intense, excited reactions out of people that don't involve tackling them and taking their shoes off, if that's something that we do want? How can we also, if we want some sort of physical contact with somebody, how can we maybe get that? And so like for that particular client, the one I'm talking about had a foot fetish. In working with this client, it was very much teaching him about consent, autonomy, boundaries, and teaching him also like scripts. So we knew he wanted to touch their feet, and sometimes he would sniff it. And so we got him to a point where, instead of at least tackling people, he would go up and he would say, hi, can I sniff your foot, please? Which was still very inappropriate, but less inappropriate than tackling somebody. At that point, people would say, oh no, but if you want, we can play a game, or if you want, we can do that. And then they would get really excited during whatever that next activity was. And then he started requesting the next activities. And so we stopped seeing him going for the feet as much. So just things like that. But we were trying all sorts of stuff with him. I even had scented markers. I was like, maybe it's the stink. Like, we were trying all different stuff. But if somebody did tell him, no, I don't think I want you to sniff my feet, then he would go, okay, back away. What can I do? It was just very sweet, and a lot more gentle. And this dude was over 6 foot and well over 250 pounds. So it was a lot more gentle and a lot less scary than him just being up in their face about a lot of stuff and tackling them. So can we get everything that? Not necessarily for this individual. We have long-term hope that, and his parents assured that if, he can gain access to other consumers and one who maybe likes having her feet massaged or something like that, would be a perfect pairing.
Yeah. The reason I asked for 2 reasons. One is because when we have a consumer that usually we're dealing with something a little bit more dangerous, not necessarily, I mean, the holds themselves are dangerous, but in terms of, victimizing another member of the community, that sort of thing. And we'll talk about, like you said, oftentimes they've been kind of on lockdown, not been able to offend in many, many years. And so we're talking about, what is maintaining this behavior? And that's kind of why I asked, is it a, multiple maintained by several different things like kind of you alluded to, or is it that somehow there's some gratification in the behavior itself? And it sounds like it's impossible really to know, but you might as well assume that it's going to be able to maintain through some sort of sexuality rather than it being just purely attention.
I'm going to go with you on that. Yes.
That really what I was thinking as you were talking about that is, how often or ever do you come across someone who is exhibiting maladaptive sexual behavior, which is not automatically reinforced by the sexual stimulation yet? For example, I had a consumer who was coming out of prison, And they said, this is the most dangerous sexual deviant case we've ever had, but we have to release him. He's done his time, but he's just constantly masturbating all day and whenever staff walks by, and saying crude things while he's doing it. Come to find out, as part of my assessment, he was deathly afraid of the other inmates and got to go to solitary and get away from them. And it was mostly escape maintained. Now, sure, there's probably some level of sexual stimulation there as well, but that didn't seem to be maintaining this, anti or socially inappropriate behavior.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So again, you found a blended function. The likelihood is in his history, he was caught having solo sex for gratifying automatic purposes, and he was put in solitary. And then now he knows this can put me in solitary. And then when he had an MO to get into solitary, engage in this behavior to get into solitary. I'd say a lot of times that kind of thing happens, and that's not even just in sexuality, right? Like we sometimes make correlates that we were not directly trained in. Absolutely. Nick?
Yeah, you had mentioned a couple minutes ago about the individual who was tackling another person to smell their feet, and then you faded that to the request to smell their feet and how it wasn't still appropriate, but it was less inappropriate. How much work did you have to put in to have buy-in from stakeholders on that? Because in my experience, it would be difficult to have buy-in anything beyond what would be considered appropriate.
Well, I'll throw out there that this individual, their parents were 100% on board with this, because this individual was, he was over 18. We're in Missouri, where there are no sex offender protections for disability. So you can have an IQ of 55 and end up on the sex offender registry for grooming somebody. Like, it's like you're literally at risk of being groomed yourself more than anything, and you end up on the registry. So in that regard, because he was engaging in behavior that was considered sexual assault, they were going to go with whatever could get it to move away from sexual assault. Now, my goal in working with him was to figure out, what is this underlying function? How can we help him get this function met? And what we realized was that he wanted the attention of young women, particularly blonde women. We noticed a lot of things, like he was never tackling women of color. He would never attack women who were older, the stuff like that. So we were like, oh, he's got a type, right? Like, so those kinds of things were important. And then getting in there, recognizing he wants their attention. We can give him some sex ed and see if that's something he wants, but he has never gotten erect in any of these instances. He's never attempted genital touch in any of these instances, and he does not get erections or attempt genital touch outside of these instances. A highly medicated client, and the likelihood is that the medicines are actually reducing arousability. But since there wasn't, again, all of these components are coming together, and they're telling me this is more of a sociosexual than a sexual function. Right? He wants attention from these women. He wants some kind of connection with these women. And he has learned, I can get a lot of attention if I grab and sniff their feet. I don't know exactly how that started. We tried to go into the history, and we had the first instances that the parents knew of, but they looked the same topographically as the current instances. And I was like, it probably started a little smaller somewhere. But at the end of the day, what can we do to reduce the illegal components of this behavior while we have funding in place? And that was the best that we could do before all of that funding changed over. And so we got to that point. I trained the new incoming staff and everything on that. And Mom is heavily involved in that team. And basically her guidance towards the team is going to be very much, and I know it, I have no doubt with this woman, is going to be very much to continue along the path that I had set, that they should be looking towards getting him connected, making friends with disabilities that are on his cognitive level, and then maybe seeing if there's any girls that would want to date him. He definitely has attraction to women, and he wants that attention. It'd be really cool if it was somebody who liked feet, because then all around, if there is any component that really is a genuine foot fetish, that gets met too. And that's even more beautiful. Right?
Yeah, it sounds like you.
Sorry, Nick.
Oh, sorry, Kyle. I was just going to comment. So it sounds like because of the fact that the behavior was so dangerous and illegal, you were able to just have buy-in on the merit of, just how severe that was. Now,
Yes.
do you think if instead of starting there, you started at a point where he was requesting to smell people's feet, do you think you would have taken a different approach, or would you have stayed the same?
Yeah. No, at that point, I would have looked at shaping over into different requests for attention and things of that nature. Again, we were on a limited funding time period. I had 6 months to work with this client, and he had a very, very limited vocal repertoire. He also would not work with people initially. Like my first probably 2 weeks were just trying to get his buy-in and get him to start moving forward with me. We did a lot of creative things to teach him consent. Consent was a lot more abstract for him than it was for a lot of my other clients. So we utilized catered to his strengths. We did a lot of, he liked crossword puzzles. He liked word searches. And so we would set them up so that as he was going through, it'd be like fill in the blank, and it would be like an answer about consent and stuff like that to just get him to start recognizing and demonstrating, giving us the responses that we would want if I had asked it as an intraverbal. And so kind of building up all of that, we got him to a point where he could, even though he had limited vocal, if I asked him, what is consent? He would say, consent is when, well, actually, he would always start it with this. Consent is like permission. Consent is like permission. Consent is when the person says yes, shows yes, understands the question, knows the consequences, and everyone is cool. So we also worked on, what does that mean? What does it mean to show yes? What does it mean to say yes? We did a bunch of different ways of showing yes, a bunch of different ways of saying yes. And then we did a bunch of role plays where he would ask me for like a drink of my water, and I'd go, yeah, of course. And then he would take it, and then I'd be like, pause, don't actually drink it, thank you. And then we'd do the same role play. He'd ask for a drink of water, and I'd be like, no, I don't think I'm okay with that. I never gave just no, yes for every trial. I would do that for one trial, but most trials I used common language. And then we also made sure to include mixed signals, because most of my clients, even the ones who are good at abstract thinking, don't understand the mixed signal, right? So the person said yes, but they look uncomfortable. You do not have consent. You have permission, but you do not have consent. The person said no, but they're nodding their head or they look excited. You still do not have consent. You don't even have permission there. They did not say yes. So just really kind of getting into all of those and making sure that they understand that if I go, yes, that's a no. Right? So we did a lot of that work with him. We did public versus private work because he didn't care about closing the door when he would go to the bathroom, stuff like that, just minor stuff that we also did and taught him as well.
Cora, I'll call on you, but before that, I love that attention to detail, to the maintenance and generalization of that skill, because there's a lot of different nuances in social interactions that mean different things. And so often I've seen it written like, you say no and then assess how he does when you say no, and it's real life isn't like that. And that's really, really cool. I like that. I also like the crossword puzzle idea, and I might steal that, just so you know. So go ahead, Cora.
I was just going to ask how you teach consent with those situations. So you read my mind and answered my questions. So
Fabulous.
That's awesome. Do you have a lot of success teaching consent? That might be a loaded question, but it is kind of abstract sometimes to think of what that looks like, especially given the nuances of different social contexts and things like that. What does that look like when you individualize that in your assessments?
I would say we've had a lot of success in teaching consent. Sometimes we do have to break it up. Like I just said, with a crossword puzzle, that's a long definition, right? It's 5 parts, Yeah. It's a large definition, but what we do with a lot of our clients who are more vocal, so that they can get that down faster, is we put it to a beat, right? I've had clients who really like to rap, And so I'm like, okay, I'm like, you want me to beatbox and you can go ahead and you can do it, or do you want to beatbox and I'll do it? Like, how do you want to go about this? And we make it something that can be easily absorbed a bit more. We also watch relevant videos. So like I have videos that I watch with adults. I have videos that I watch with kids and teens. I will say amaze.org has amazing videos. I love amaze.org. It's a really, really good place to find videos. But there's a lot of like moving through. So you've got to teach the definition, then you've got to teach what the different ways of looking, showing yes and no can be. Then you've got to teach about, the actual role plays, like seeing it, doing it. What is a mixed signal? And then we teach about the consequences. What would be consequences if you respected someone's consent in this situation? You asked for my water and I said, yes. If you drank it, I'm going to feel like grossed out and I'm not going to want my water back. And I'm probably also going to try to avoid you in the future because I don't want you asking for my water. Right. So like we talk about those things and we make sure that they understand different consequences for social things. Then we move it into sexual. We don't even with all of that before we get into sexual.
Sure.
And because we've created this framework, a lot of my learners are very rigid. And so the reason that I created this 5-part definition was because over the course of my clinical practice, my rigid thinkers got around every freaking consent definition. They always could. There was always a reason that rape was okay. And I was like, oh my gosh, we got to like, so.
Interesting. Yeah.
These logical autistic thinkers can find a way around stuff, man. So I was like, okay, if I have this really, really, really comprehensive definition, we can refer to it. So when I have a 15-year-old who tells me that he's going to grow up to have sex with the family dog, and I'm like, oh, okay, we need to talk about why maybe that's an issue. And he's like, well, dogs can definitely show yes and say yes. They wag their tail, they bark or yip. Okay. Can they understand the question? Can they know the consequences? Is that possible for a dog to really understand the consequences of sex with a human? And so we start talking about those things. Can children understand those questions? Can they understand the consequences? Would their parents be okay with it? Would everyone be cool with this? So like getting into this definition, I can go back and apply logic from it to keep people within their framework.
Go ahead, Cora.
I'm back. I'm going to try to get this question out so it makes sense. So tell me if it doesn't. So what we see a lot of the times is exactly what you're explaining, like these role play situations, right? And we do those. However, where I struggle is they'll come back to me and they'll say, this situation, it didn't sound like this, or, measuring how, I guess, effective that role playing situation is. And because we want to protect independence, we want to protect privacy, I'm obviously not going to be standing in the room as my client's about to have sex, making sure and measuring and assessing that the consent was provided. So have you thought about like measuring the outcome of these role playing situations and how we identify if they're effective?
So something that we do is we actually go beyond that, at least for our local clients. It's a lot trickier to do this with our telehealth clients, but our local clients, we have HIPAA trained contractors who are actors and actresses here in the St. Louis community. And they literally, all they've had is HIPAA training and a family care safety registry check, background screening. They don't know. They're not RBTs. They don't know anything about this client. They don't know anything about ABA per se. They know that there is going to be a person who is going to come up to them in this setting and is going to attempt to flirt with them. And if this person engages in any boundary crossing of any kind, I want them to respond like they would if a rando came up to them and did that. That way, I can be standing back a bit. I can be taking data, and then I can step in and I can go pause, and then the actor pauses. And they're like, and so then we sit there and I'm like, are they showing yes or no? What's going on here? Okay, what should you do? All right, let's see. Unpause. And then I back away and I let them do their thing. And then we go ahead and we do a community observation where it's not actors and actresses, and I act as a wingman. So if they do mess up with a real person, I get in there and I'm like, oh man, been looking for you everywhere. Oh, do you know where I left my car keys? We need to go find those. Hey, I'm sorry to interrupt. Yeah, I got to get him out of here. We got to go find my car keys, right? Like, boom, easy way to get them out of that situation before they enter into illegal territory. But that's that kind of earned me a nickname. They used to call me the wingman for autism, because that's what I would do. Was just kind of like get them out of those situations if necessary. But we try and make sure that as we're teaching consent, we're varying it up as much as possible, because people will respond in various ways. One of the programs we have is called Subtle Clues, and it's a whole program about learning little things like, if somebody is nodding too often, if somebody's eyes start to look like they're pleading to get out, like, right? Like, so we start teaching about those things, because you can smile and also be going, sure, yeah, okay. That's not a good sign, even though they're smiling. But the client will come back and say, well, if they're smiling, they're happy, right? So we have to teach them that people sometimes have these intensely mixed signals, and you've got to be able to read the subtleties in those. And so we actually have that as a prerequisite to our consent program. We run it as a baseline to see which of those they might need before they can learn the consent program.
For any BCBAs working in the autism world, probably with children, what skills are you seeing as people age into adulthood that maybe went through some of those programs? What skills are you seeing in need, or maybe some skill deficits, or what's your plea to the behavior analytic community to start working with kids in this realm?
Stop teaching compliance. I am so sick of staff having way too much power over clients' lives. It puts clients at risk. About 90% by the time they are dead of old age of people in disability settings have experienced abuse at the hands of caregivers. So 90%, that's a horrible statistic. So we really want to make sure that we are looking at that early on. If parents or school need compliance, then teach it very much within context, and teach that kid to disrupt where they can. I think it's important that people learn to stand up for themselves and have a sense of self. I really think that parent training should be looking across the lifespan and preparing parents for puberty and sex and relationships, and not just right now. A lot of the stuff that we think is coming way, way down the road comes really early. Kids are hitting puberty now at 7, 8, 9 years old. Okay. That means that they're starting to engage in things that we used to consider very middle school or high school behaviors, starting to trickle into elementary school more and more. So we really need to be looking at how we're setting stuff up. We should be also aware that a lot of clients with disabilities do end up on the sex offender registry in any given year. Around 50% of sex offenders in the US are clients with intellectual disabilities or autism. So that's awful. It's sad. So when we look at that, how can we prevent that? One, don't teach forced compliance. Two, really teach consent early on as a non-sexual topic. Again, it's like permission plus, right? I can give someone permission and still feel bad that they acted on it if I didn't look like I really wanted to give them that permission, right? So learning about that stuff. Teaching parents not to force their kids to accept tickles. Tickles is like one of the worst things. Like the kid is literally telling you no, and you're like, I'm bigger than you, so your words don't matter. That's a horrible lesson to teach somebody who's going to end up being big. Right? So we need to think about these things, because a lot of our learners learn stuff early and it stays in its same box as they move through life. They don't have contextual contextual flexibility that starts to generalize things or fade it away when the context changes. Another one that I think is important is learning to accept no. I can teach somebody consent all day and they can do really, really well in program. But can they really accept a no without moving into coercion or whining or making fool of themselves? So that's something that I think is really important early on, is learning to accept a no. Not no to your own human rights and things like that, but learning to accept a no from time to time, I think, is important. I would say another piece that to me is super, super important, and I know sometimes I sound like I'm on a soapbox preaching, but I really do think that anybody who is working with the autistic community should be learning about the queer community because of the incredible amount of overlap. We have so Strang et al. In 2018 released a meta review where they looked across a lot of different journals from a lot of different modalities and sciences. And they were able to determine that the population at the highest risk of suicide out of any populational intersection was autistic adults with gender dysphoria.
Wow.
So that's something that's major. Autistic adults are 7 times per George and Stokes 2018 are 7 times more likely than their neurotypical peers to be trans or gender nonconforming and to experience gender dysphoria. So when we look at that's a call to action is what that is, because we're working so hard to give these little humans these great lives. But if they're dead at 22, was that work worth it? Right? Like, we've got to be making sure that everything we're doing builds them up for lives that they can actually live and have motivation to live and can access reinforcement in. It's amazing to me how many of my clients have come to me and they're out as gay or out as trans and they don't know what poppers is. They don't know how to access a gay club. They don't know what binders are. They don't know these things. And I'm like, poppers, the first time you go to a gay club, you might be offered poppers and you need to know what that is. That is a drug, right? Like you need to know what these things are that a lot of people don't know. Or you might end up, if you're trans and you want your breasts removed, but that's not an option. There's binders and they're going to be uncomfortable. So we need to teach you about how to use them, how to tolerate them. And then also, if you don't like the binders, start budgeting and saving up for a top surgery. So things like that, really working with these clients. And sometimes early on, I mean, I had a 15-year-old that we came in and he was trying to chop off his breasts. And nobody was acknowledging that he was trans, right? They kept calling him a her. They kept dead naming him. And when I got called in because it was sexual misbehavior, trying to chop off her breasts. No one told me this person was trans. I get in there, the first thing he does is tells me his name, which is different than what I've been told, and starts telling me that everyone around him thinks he's a girl. And needs to get his breasts off him so people will take him seriously. Just like, okay, you're not the one who needs the intervention. Everybody else needs the intervention.
Right. Oh man, a call to action there for sure. I'll include in the show notes those journals that you mentioned. Just before we end, because we're nearing our hour here, just a quick plug for Empowered Center, if you want to give where we can find more information on that and the CBS certification or anything else you feel relevant.
No, I appreciate that. Our website is going to be empoweredcenter.com. We do have a tab on there for the CBS certification. And if you click on that tab and then go to the bottom of that page, there is a button that will take you over to our formal CBS certification page, which is a joint site with us and CEUs by Study Notes ABA. So it's a bit large and chaotic because they are a large entity. So we have a nice, easy path to it on my simple website. Awesome. You can also follow us on our socials, Empowered Center STL.
Awesome. As a subject matter expert series, this is everything that I hoped it would be. I was so glad to have you today, Nicholas. Thanks so much for being here, and we'll end there.